All right, and welcome to the Practical Discipleship Podcast. We've got Dan DeBruler here with us today. Thank you, Dan, for being here.
Oh, man, it's always a pleasure.
Dan's a regular, and he regularly brings value, and it's a wonderful thing. Who we have here is Pastor Jeff Hoagland.
That would be me.
Talk to me, brother.
It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you.
This is such good fun just hanging out with friends and just talking about life.
It is a great atmosphere, great thing we've got going on here. I love the discussion. And before we kicked off, we were talking about some aspects of what practical discipleship looks like. The idea that in an intimate practical discipleship setting, you have the incredible opportunity to talk about things that are relevant right there in that moment.
Right.
And that was one of the catalysts, one of the reasons for us, taking this on us so that we can address some of those things. And we're probably going to do that today as well, I'm guessing. So I hope you guys have brought something to the table. Dan, what do you have?
I've been thinking about how Jesus modeled discipleship, how he modeled leadership in close settings. And, as we find ourselves looking at the news and then discussing the news and all the things that go with the things that get our dander up. I was thinking how, there was a time, you guys remember, well, you may not, you may remember the song, Video Killed the Radio Star?
Yes.
Well, we read those lyrics now and we nod because it was true.
Right.
But I heard something else not too long ago, and it probably wasn't original with the person that said it, but it was air conditioning killed the family. Because when air conditioning came along, people stopped sitting in the cool of the evening on their lawn. They stopped sitting on the porch and just kind of talking, maybe even talking to the neighbor. And they begin to move inside, and these one-way conversations begin to take place. And slowly but surely, we have gotten further and further apart, and we have kind of lost touch with what it means to have true human relationships, as
so
time has gone along. So now, we hear the news, and we're shouting from afar at what we don't agree with or what we don't like, and we lose all that opportunity that Jesus knew. I mean, how many times we read in the Bible where he invited himself to somebody else's house for dinner?
Yeah.
He knew the value of that.
He invited himself to someone else's
I need to get, I think we all could get better at that, right?
Yeah, no, I need to.
Hey, don't you want to invite me over for dinner? Yeah, that's really good. Isolationism.
Yeah.
So, and I love the way you kind of tied that in. I think it's true. Some of the things that we look at as modern advances and great advances become things that are detrimental. One of the downsides of that, you said we look at the news and we hear these things that are happening in the world, but we hear them in a context of isolation, which prohibits profound discussion. And we all know this. We know this to be true, that one man sounds right until you hear another.
Yeah.
When we get together and we all bring a perspective, that perspective can build a much greater perspective when we introduce the different, perspectives. And I think that's something that we lose. All of our information is ran through the silo of our understanding. And I don't know that that's ever healthy. Think about what the Bible does. The Bible is that mechanism that God uses to leverage you into a different point of view. And even the more we understand it, the more it sometimes becomes a contrast of our understanding. But that isolationism, so huge in our culture. And these little rascals right here.
Yes,
this is the greatest isolation. But we feel connected, but we're connected from a POV, a point of view.
Right.
Everything is just an opportunity for us to platform our perspective.
Yeah. When Dan was talking about that, I remember traveling up to Philadelphia, and there was so much life on the street, and people were hanging out on their porches. And I asked them the question. I said, "Man, it just seems so lively here. What is the secret sauce?" And they said, "No air conditioning." It was the summertime.
Yeah.
So they spent time outside, but within that context, they were talking, they were chatting. They were living life together. The kids were outside playing together as a whole. And it's funny how that morphed into our quality time has become, let's sit on the same couch and watch TV.
Yeah.
Rather than talk about things.
I was struck with that same thing on my visit to the Philippines recently. As I looked, it was just that thing to see the streets full of kids playing.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I was able to look well beyond that thing that would turn it off to most people and say, well, there's a lack of technology, there's a lack of modern conveniences, there's poverty. Well, there may have been poverty in some areas, but relationally, if Christ is there, you talk about a richness of interactivity that leads to us realizing we are in probably a much greater state of poverty relationally than what we can imagine. It was beautiful to see there. And did they have air conditioning? I guess a lot of them didn't have air.
Most do not in that area.
And it wasn't even hot when I was there.
And if they have air conditioning, it costs so much that they limited its use.
Yeah. But to see that there was so refreshing.
Well, anybody that knows me at all, and you can Google me, knows
Dan
that
the Bruler.
I'm not opposed to technology. I love the tools that we have, and that's how I consider technology. It's like, how can I use this to do this thing over here? But there was a time when the news meant something, and I'm talking about the news as it came from your neighbor or from the neighboring town. It was stuff that you could do something about.
Right.
It was news not that we just react to, that we respond to.
Not something to inflame us one way or the other towards the upcoming candidacy or the upcoming election. It was...
Right. So now, like you said, we've got these phones, and these phones will deliver us something. I saw something as I was walking up to the table today. I thought, man, but we get delivered these encapsulated stories, and we become inflamed, we become enraged, and we begin to react. Right. But there's nothing we can do about the majority of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like we can't go 3 streets down or to the next town because somebody's barn burned down and take care of that barn. Mm-hmm. Instead, we just be mad at whoever set the fire on whoever caused whatever to happen.
Yeah.
And so we just find ourselves being angry because we are so connected that we become disconnected. We know so much that we can do so little about.
Yeah. And I think that allows us to really fall victim to other people's agendas. I think it can become so manipulative. Mm-hmm. It would be one thing, and that is something with the church that I think we need to be careful of. If we lose sight of what our mission is, and what our purpose is, and we begin to herald every injustice that is lived in our nation or existed in the world and will continue to exist as long as there are deprived men, we can really lose sight of the purpose that we're there. But what if, I like what you said, what if during our inundation with these things, they become cues that remind us to focus in on what the real answer to most of these problems are. If we look back, we see that most of these things are being even perpetuated because of such a divide, such a division between such a large chasm between priorities and values, and everybody thinks they're right or righteous in some capacity. But what if they are really opportunities, and how can we leverage that better as just disciples, as followers of Christ? How do we do that? How do we not allow these things to further isolate us and draw wedges, but remind us that we have a nation and a people and a culture to reach and be salt and light to?
Maybe that first step is just to realize that everything we're consuming has a bias, and once we understand that. Hopefully, as Christians, we would not just be told what to think, but we would know how to think and process and be able to discuss this and ask great questions. And I always encourage good questions from folks, because it always leads to truth if we're truly searching for that. And so same thing with the news. When we hear something, we just don't take it at face value.
You can't anymore.
No. So asking good questions, digging a little deeper, if it really is stirring us to do something about it, or for us to want to know more. And so I think that's the first step, just realizing that there's a bias there, and then asking good questions.
Well, Jesus taught about this, and Paul wrote about this, and the problem is discontent. We are so focused on the promises of somewhere else, something else, sometime else. We focus, what I wrote in my notes before we sat down, we are so focused on the milk and honey of the promises of tomorrow that we'll listen to any pundit that will tell us about that, as opposed to leaning into that daily bread that Jesus talked about.
That's so good.
And that's where we really are. We are so discontent. We have so many things going on in our life, and we have nobody. I'm sorry for generalizing. there are so many people who have nobody breathing truth into their life that we think our problems are the utmost, and they'll never, ever, ever get better. And so we're looking for some promise somewhere, and the promise has already been given. We have what we need, and again, Jesus spoke to this. Paul wrote to us about these things, and it's about grabbing hold of what we have been given, the provision we've been given for today, and beginning to teach that in the circle right around us with that touch. You mentioned the word authenticity, touching people authentically and being authentic in front of others.
So how do we as disciples trying to do discipleship practically? I'd love both your feedback on this. How do we promote authentic conversation that leads to deeper, authentic relationships? Because I think there's a dearth, there's a drought of depth in relationships.
Yeah.
We are taught, we are trained to deal with things on a superficial level, and I believe part of it is isolationism, and I think part of it is, and let's be honest, is protectionism. We don't want to entrust, and we're afraid to entrust ourselves to other people because that means that we have to love them, and love is always presented from a sacrificial perspective.
Well, it starts by us being real about what we know about our relationship with Christ. When we know that we are truly, honestly forgiven, when we know that there is grace that's been extended to us on the front side, we're not so ashamed, we're not so afraid to drop our guard. That's where it starts.
Right.
Us dropping our guard in the relationships with those around us. And that may mean for you, your family. Those people right around you, quit hiding the secrets in your family, and conversation will become more open.
So does that mean I need to invite myself to supper?
That's what I'm doing.
Come on by. But yeah, we have to realize that what we have been given is for everyone else, but we have to drop our guard. If you want people to get closer, you have got to be able to be gotten closer to. Is that the sense?
I like it.
So what about in the microcosm of that in the family? Used to you did supper, and when I say used to, I'll be honest with you, that was even a very small, very early portion of my childhood. My parents went through a divorce, and that was even gone, and everything became life on the run for me for the next 40 plus years. And how do you even begin? Where does somebody begin to establish or reestablish opportunities for authentic conversation and connectivity?
Well, it's a fair question.
Yeah.
But you just begin talking. Begin actually talking. You don't have to turn the air conditioner off and go sit outside in the cool breeze.
Invite people in.
Yeah, but turn off the television.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start, and we could agree that there is less and less that we would have our families consume now anyway. But begin having those conversations, and even in the place that you work or the place where, whatever social circle you're in, begin to drop your guard and be honest about who you are, because that what you have been given is real.
Yeah.
If you were a Christian, and we're talking largely to Christians here, but be real with those around you, and that will spread.
So somebody who hasn't and is listening now and wants to. So Jeff, Dan, either one of you, I guess, what is an example of that in your life where that commitment and that platform presented what has it done? What did it look like, and how has it affected you?
Amen. Well, I'll go first. For me, I can really relate to what Dan was saying. It starts with us, right? And as leaders, we're all leaders within the church. I present myself as approachable and very followable and transparent. And so when we talk about discipleship, it's really life on life. And so those who I am discipling one-on-one or within a small group context, I typically take them with me in life. And it's not just we're meeting at a table from this time to this time. It's actually life on life. I'll take people out with me when I'm doing something ministry, or if I'm doing something with my car, just taking it to the mechanics. We get to spend time with each other. We get to talk about life and just be real. And, we can put on a front for so long, but then, when they see how we react to certain situations, they see the real us, how the love of God shows up or doesn't, and when we make a mistake, we're quick to repent and get back on that right path.
Practical discipleship.
Yeah. Just being very real and saying, hey, there is no holy man syndrome here. We are all a work in progress, and we're here to help one another. And so for us, that's how it starts, and discipleship just takes on a whole different meaning. We don't really, and I'm going to ruffle some feathers here probably, but, in our context at least, it doesn't take a curriculum.
Right.
It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I remember what a friend told me, because I was trying to dig a little deeper, because his small groups were just taking off. And I said, brother, what's going on? What are y'all doing? What curriculum are you using? And he says, there's a bottle of peanuts there on the table, and he just put it in the middle of the table, and he poured water for everyone. He says, this is our curriculum. And I said, I don't understand it. And he says, we just get together. Everyone's so busy in life. We just get together and just, we fellowship. We just talk with one another. We ask how each other is doing. And then when one has a problem, we pray about it. He says, as followers of Christ, shouldn't that be how we are? Without a curriculum, we should still overflow with the love of Jesus.
Oh, but didn't Jesus sit down every night with the disciples and unroll the Torah? And I never heard that alluded to in Christ doing life with his disciples. But let me dig a little deeper.
Right.
Jeff, is there a person and an example of that authentic, life-changing relationship that has occurred in your life? Is there a specific time that you've went deeper in a relationship, and what were the pros, what were the cons, what were the benefits for you?
Sure. When the Bible says you have many teachers but not many spiritual fathers, right? I really believe in spiritual fathering and mothering, and so it takes this whole the relationship just goes to another level. It starts off as maybe a friend, then it becomes a mentoring type relationship, and then mentoring is really kind of more specific, and then something just happens within that relationship. And I can point to Patrick, who is at our Anderson Creek campus. I met him in a drive-through at a coffee shop. He was a barista there, and it went from there to just frequenting that place. That's kind of my mode of operation, and just striking up conversations. So it went from there to meeting up with him, getting to know him better. Now that he was 18 years old, now he's in his 30s and has several kids, and we are so close. His children call me Papa. And so that's how it goes. But they would come to the house. They had access to my house, well, even if I'm not there. And the relationship got to the point where we would talk so late into the night. Me or Tanya, if we got tired, we said, hey guys, you can stay, but we're going to bed. It was that close.
Turn off the TV when you leave.
Yes, exactly. And and so those type of relationships, man, those are dear to my heart. And I do have a few that are being nurtured in the Philippines right now. Mm-hmm. They're right along those same lines.
Dan, anybody?
Well, I could think of a number of situations where I was on the discipling end, but I can think of another situation where I was discipled. I can tell you the other side of that scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's what
years ago we had not been living in North Carolina very long, and I went to a men's breakfast. I was a nominal Christian at the time, but I went to this men's breakfast, and they were serving, among other things, grits. And the guy said, do you want grits? I said, no.
What's a grit?
I said, I really don't like them. He said, you just haven't had anybody fix them right yet. So this man gets me a couple bowls of grits, comes around the counter, comes and sits with me and starts talking to me. He's probably 15 years older than me. And we begin talking, and he tells me and shows me all the ways that you can have grits. Well, that began this relationship. That was the drive-through with you and Patrick.
That's how you developed the grit in your life. Yeah.
There you go. And so this guy began inviting me over to his house. And, I was a guitar player. I didn't know that he knew anything about the guitar, but he was inviting me over. He said, hey, come over and play. I play the harmonica a little bit. And, you could play and I could play my harmonica. You give me somebody who can play to practice. Well, he's discipling me rather, all along the way with all these little things and bringing me in, and he's letting me know about one hobby after another that just happens to align with something that I absolutely love. He is doing life with me. He's letting me do life with him. He's inviting me over to be discipled. He's inviting me to his table. Nice. You know, as it turned out, the man was a classically trained guitar player, you know, and he knew a little bit about woodworking. He had a shop bigger than my house, you know, but he wasn't dropping his guard on all this. Instead, he was using these things to allow me to get closer and closer, or allow him to get closer and closer, so that he could tell me about this Jesus that he loved. So he could show me what it looked like to disciple someone else. I mean, what a great model. And you know what you talked about, taking that thing and going just a little further, until now, you know, the children of the then 18-year-old call you Papa. That's amazing.
And now you have a woodworking shop.
And I like grits.
And you like grits, which is a miracle.
You fix it right.
And he roasts his own coffee.
That's right.
Hallelujah. Although he's drinking water today. And Jeffrey, you need to come into this century with a smaller cup other than this big. But that's another. So what I hear you saying, and I want to go slightly different angle, become somewhat transparent in this. You see what the benefit as giving that can look like, and what the benefit of receiving that can look like. Then there are certain things that we experience that impact us, is what you're saying, from both sides. We see that experiencing certain deep relational connectivity can have tremendous impact on us. I've been impacted a little differently. I didn't have what I would have referred to as a spiritual father, and I think that kind of slowed my development. I'll be honest. But it did something else. I remember as a young man, very young, my dad was a minister, and he traveled, and he met a lot of people, and he was on the go a lot. And and we had a great relationship. I want to say that. He was probably the closest thing to a spiritual father and a father that I had. But during that time, I remember as a young man going to these men's meetings, and these men were all interacting, and I was probably, 9, 10, 11, at the time, just a young little fella. And I remember thinking that, man, I would just like to be acknowledged. I'd like to be, recognized, because one, everybody is up here and I'm down here, and it's like, okay. And I remember at one of those meetings, one of the guys that he was meeting with as they were doing their church stuff and their big muckety muck, pastor or leader or whatever stuff, that one of them just stopped, took a few minutes to talk to me. Now, and that was the only time it happened. I mean, that was one of the few times. Every other time it's kind of like they rub you on the head and say, cute kid, what's her name, keep going, that superficial kind of thing. This guy stopped for a few moments and come over and just sat down with me, met me where I was. And I remember sitting down, getting to my level, and just asking me some questions. And we had just a very, very short conversation. But I remember what it felt like to be among people but still desire that acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. Now, as a pastor, as a leader, it has affected me in that when I see somebody who appears to be marginalized or overlooked or whatever, I have something on the inside of me that compels me to reach that person kind of where they are. And I'm probably, if I'm honest, somewhat broken when it comes to deep connected relationships. I mean, I love you guys. I feel like y'all are some of my best friends, and y'all probably don't even know me, very well. Jeff, you've been over to the house a few times. Dan, I can't remember if you've been over, but
you need to invite yourself over.
Yeah, you need to invite yourself over for dinner, or I'll invite me over for dinner. But I'm in a stage in a season where I still have 4 kids at home. I'm married. There's a lot going on, and just getting my house clean to get people over is and I have a tribe at home that sucks the relational energy out of me, regularly, and I'm trying to be there for them. But if I'm honest, I think a lot of people really don't know how to go deeper in relationship.
And I think I'm so glad that you even brought that up, because that has become my MO. Now, I've had the opportunity, 2 people I would call great men of God or fathers, in the faith, who have come along at different points in my faith walk over time, that have made me more aware of the marginalized. I'll see that person that's just standing in the lobby at church and, there can be a lot of people out there, but there's that one person that's just standing there. And we have one of the deacons, one of the elders at our church, super tall guy, like 6'12". I don't know how tall he is. He's tall. But I watch how this man interacts with children. You know, a child will be there and they'll be introduced. This tall man will get down on his knees and talk right into speak to the eyes of this child. And you know, we need to be those people. If we want to affect the world for Christ, we have got to be real. We have got to go to the marginalized. We got to look at what Jesus did. You know, I mean, the people whose houses he invited himself to were typically the marginalized.
Yeah.
You know, and the people who came and sometimes who showed up unannounced were also the marginalized. And he began to educate those people who were there, the muckety-muck of the community, as to why those people were just as welcome as they were.
Yeah, wow. You know, it's one thing, even I can see that picture. Think about it relationally, the difference between stooping to talk to somebody and actually bending down to get on that level. And it does take more effort. It does take intentionality, and it takes a little more to recover when you're 50 plus, you know, to get up. But if we stop considering ourselves as much as we consider the other person, then I think there are residual effects for both of us at that point.
Yeah. Now, I love what you said about being intentional about going to those who seem marginalized. I mean, imagine if all of us learn to do that. And here's a confession. I'm actually more on the shy side than what some would think. And so when I meet people, it's always kind of an awkward thing. And so I don't know how to bring the conversation. But what I've learned to do is find commonality.
Yeah.
And but what I've taught our people to do, and especially our leaders, is to be intentional about going to folks that they don't know, and then practice the handoff. So you're talking, and say I meet Dan, and he's talking about woodworking and all these different technology gadgets that he has, and I have no clue. Well, if I know that you have that same thing in mind, same hobbies, same commonalities, I said, hey, let me go find Pastor Tony. Introduce. Tell about the commonalities. Ninja back.
And you thrive in that way, and that's called networking. Yeah. And Jeff, you're one of the most networked guys. You know somebody in just about every vein. Even in those relationships, your gifting and your personality become strengths, not inhibitors. I'm not exactly the person who walks into a room and just assumes everybody can't wait to meet me. Okay, some people maybe are that way, but I just walk in going, okay, here I am. Who gets to meet me? That's not exactly my attitude either. But there are certain attributes that I have that I embrace, particularly in a church context. God has given me a gift of leadership.
Yes.
And it is a gift. I think everybody can develop skills, but he's given me the desire, when I say leadership, to help people grow and be everything that they can be. You hear me say, I want you to be everything you can be so you can do everything God's called you to do. That's a motto of my life. And I try to embrace that, just like you embrace the networking. I look for places that I can bring value. And if it's a marginalized person and I feel like I can bring acknowledgement or relational value, that's who I'm drawn to. Yeah. If it's a church leader, I try to bring. If it's congregation, even if it's I do better speaking to homeless people because I feel like I've got some hope that I want to give them and I want to encourage them, as opposed to being in an executive board meeting. You just have to do that adaptation. What's your natural tendencies?
Well, I am shy. I like Jeff. I don't.
You're a radio personality and you're shy. Is that what you just said?
Well, the room's empty.
That's true.
Just him and Mike.
But I've said this before. If there's two people standing at the elevator and nobody's talking, I'm probably going to be the guy that breaks the silence because I can't just be there. That's more awkward to be together and not talk than to be the one that breaks the silence. I don't know how many times. I'll be at the gas station, and we're both standing there. We're both filling up our card. We're both trying to not look at the other one in the eye. I'll say, hey man, is that factory color? I like that. I like your truck.
So you're the king of the quirky comment.
It's like, or I'll mention their shoes, just whatever, just so we're not standing there with nobody talking.
Right.
And those can lead to people who are waiting to get to those pumps getting a little agitated because when people actually experience conversation, when somebody takes an interest in them, they'll stop, and the world around us, the world in our periphery, begins to go away as people spend a moment with somebody.
This is going to sound terrible, but I have probably seen and had more impact, or at least I've had expressed to me, people who were impacted more because of a 10-minute conversation than a sermon series. I'm sorry. There have been people that I've stopped in that situation and said, let's just make the most of this opportunity. There's somebody here. Let's just talk. And what appeared to be an arbitrary, knocking or starting up of a conversation with a quirky comment or off something became something that was more impactful. And I've had people express, man, thank you for taking a minute. Even if it's not spoken, there's been this massive appreciation from both of us just to enhance each other's life for just a moment. And I know we look and go, well, I'm never impacting somebody's life. I don't get to talk to 1,000 people a weekend or whatever. But I'm telling you, I would rather affect one person profoundly than 1,000 people superficially.
And we never know what impact we're having on someone. A big blessing to me is when someone said, I remember what you told me. And then they quote it back, and I'm like, wow, did I say that?
Can I write that down?
That's good. I'm going to tweet that out. But what a blessing. And sometimes it doesn't take a whole lot, does it? It just takes that intentionality. I remember I taught at a private Christian school. I taught music, and I was getting ready to start, and there was a young man there, and I saw him. I knew he had signed up for the class, and I said, hey, brother, I heard we're going to be jamming this upcoming week. I look forward to it. His mom called the school and said, I don't know what that teacher said to my son, but I have never seen him so talkative and so full of joy. But that's all I said. Hey, brother, I heard we're going to be jamming next week.
Yeah.
And that's all it took.
Talk about starve for attention and recognition, and we don't realize the value because I don't think we realize how isolated people really are. I don't think we realize, I think we make a huge mistake. I think Christians assume people don't want to hear what we've got to say.
Yeah.
They don't. I think we assume that people are closed to different ideas because there is such a staunch divide in our media and in the things that we're receiving all the time. I think people are a lot more open or willing to meet a person than a perspective.
Do you think it's because we value our privacy so much that we over-respect and we try not to overstep? And
that is. I'll be honest with you. A lot of times I don't want to inconvenience somebody. I try to move very quickly from the gas pump because I'm so concerned about, ticking somebody else off or being disrespectful. When I drive, my son, my youngest son, which is our last first, he's getting his permit process or going through the permit process. And I'm learning this about me. And I'm Brian, if you're watching, please forgive me. But what I notice is I'm so aware of everybody else, that I'm short with him. I'm going, man, you need to be convenient or be courteous. I want him to be a courteous driver to everybody else so much, and then I'll stop and think, you know what? I really do rush, and a lot of what I do is because what I think they may be thinking. And we should be courteous drivers. We should be courteous drivers, but we should also be courteous to the ones that we're teaching to drive.
Sure. You want to show your coffee cup?
Oh, yeah. This is true. Be careful or you will end up in my sermon. Somebody gave me this coffee cup, and I will just tell you, I keep it facing to me. So it's a right-handed cup. It is true, and you all know that.
Yeah, that's right.
But isn't it life and these conversations and relationships that really become the framework for some of the most effective sermons?
I believe so.
I cannot tell you too many sermons, but I can tell you a lot of sermon illustrations that were based on instances. Think about it. The Bible is full of what? Stories about what people did.
Yeah. And that's where this guy just flourishes. He tells some stories, and those stories are sticky.
Yeah, they are.
Well, you talked about isolationism, and when you get isolated, you begin to determine what other people think. That you even said it. I'm so concerned about what other people might think
Right.
as we're doing this. And it's that isolation that leads us to think that people don't want to hear what we have to say, that they're not open. I was listening to an interview with an author, a Christian author here recently, and he was talking about a time when he was far from God. And he said in his interview, he said, at one point he said, well, I don't believe in God, but I miss him.
Oh,
Wow. And I think that is so many people around us. There are people, they know that there's something more. God in his word said he made it evident to all of us that he's there, that he's here. But when we assume that people don't want to hear what we have to say because we didn't say anything, they don't want to hear what we have to say because we didn't. We begin to determine what people are thinking about us, and so we don't open that door. We don't mention the wacky looking shoes at the gas pump or the color of the truck or whatever. We just leave it on the table and just assume, well, they wouldn't want to hear it anyway.
Yeah, I think how we deliver, matters as well, which is one reason that I'll be very transparent, that I'm very excited about what we're doing here, that we're able to sit down and have a conversation. And maybe you guys struggle with this, but when it comes to communicating to people, especially in a church context, in a traditional Sunday morning sermon setting, I desire with all of my heart to sit down and speak with, not at, to converse with, not at, even to drop, the sermon cadence that we so easy drop into, so easy for me to drop. And Dan, I see at times that you tell that story, or you start with that story, and it becomes so much more conversational than even instructional. I think it's important for people to receive instructions. I think that people need to have takeaway. I think people need to learn the word and have the application of the word. But I think the context that the modern church culture has puts people in our culture at an awkward position, in that they're sitting through a teaching or a talking or a lecture, as opposed to engaging in real, ideas. And I think for us to even be able to sit and talk these things through and think these things through conversationally, as opposed to each one of us even taking a turn to make a point, or even taking a turn to, to do this, montage or whatever. Anyway, I struggle to make that connection opportunity have real connectivity.
Amen.
See, I kind of can't start without it.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to what your cup says, I actually sent your wife a message the other day. We had the opportunity to work on a project together, and I said, I want to thank you for what happened yesterday, because you gave me the illustration to begin this message today. And you have to ask her about it. But I think it's real. I think it's really important for us to realize that the experiences that we have with God, as they become real, as we begin to recognize all the things that have happened in our life and begin to see the God in them, it becomes easier to relate those stories, to break that ice, to draw people in, to allow them to be in the conversation, because now they think they know a little something more about us, or at least they understand our perspective. As we get into teaching and applying the word, they understand that we have seen it with our own eyes. And we can draw them in, and not in a lure them kind of way, but draw them in as to let them see themselves in the story kind of way.
I remember flying to Southern California. I think it was Southern California, wherever Rick Warren is. And I know I say Rick Warren and people have different, ideas about that, but it was an incredible conference. And I remember going to this conference, and I kind of had an attitude of, all right, this is a mega church with, 20, 30, 40,000 people. I don't remember. I didn't expect a whole lot relationally, or otherwise I may have told you this story before. But we walk into this auditorium, and there's about 1,200, I'd say between there's hundreds and hundreds of pastors in this particular meeting. And it was this purpose-driven life kind of thing. He was talking about a purpose-driven church. Anyway, we're in this meeting, and Rick walks out on the stage, and he sits down, and he said, I don't want to have a conference. I want to have a conversation. And he sat down in his laid back California, kind of style with his no socks on and his shirt inappropriately unbuttoned. I'm just saying, and his little goatees scraggly everywhere. And he just began to talk like he was sitting in the living room. And when the conference was over, he got up and he walked off the stage and he went to individual after individual for a long time. And I was sick. I was like, man, I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed that he was able to be vulnerable and real and connect with that many people.
Yeah.
And I was struggling to do so with many less.
Yeah.
And it became such an inspiration to me. And I think I might have shared this. I felt like I was doing ministry on a skateboard in the driveway, and this dude was on a motorcycle in the freeway just rocking it. And that was probably 15, 20 years ago. And it just let me know I needed to see that there was more, that the bar could be much higher relationally than what I had ever imagined.
And you know what's cool about hearing that story, because I have a Rick Warren story too. I met him at Exponential, and there was a breakfast with some of the pastors. And so he was there, and there was a guy next to me. He was from Nicaragua, and he had just came back to the States to plant a church. And I was getting there kind of late, and I sat down and introduced myself to the fellow next to me. And he says, man, I don't know who that guy is right there, but he is the friendliest guy in the world. And I said, which guy? He pointed to Rick Warren, because Rick was doing exactly that, brother. So it just shows that that's how he is, and he intentionally goes out and finds pastors, and it doesn't matter if you're in the launching stage of a church plant, or you have a church of 10 or a church of 10,000.
And that's the danger of the isolation and lack of relationship, because that's not the narrative you hear painted of him or any other mega church pastor.
Right.
You never hear those type of stories. Nobody ever told that story except somebody who personally experienced it.
Yeah.
That's that power of relationship.
He hugged every pastor in that place that morning.
Yeah. And I never got the impression because he was trying to fulfill a celebrity status. I felt like he gave me at that conference permission to care, permission to connect, permission to slow down and take advantage of an opportunity that you may never have again, whether that's a conference or whether that's a gas pump. Those things are life-changing things that develop stories. And that's important. So closing thoughts, Dan?
Well, I think with the Rick Warren thing, he understands the model that we've been given, and that's the model of noticing people, of letting them feel important. I mean, think of Jesus. He calls Zacchaeus down.
Little man in a tree.
Think of the woman with the issue of blood. It wasn't that she was healed; it's that he noticed her. That's an important takeaway from that story. He noticed her. And so whether that's, at a gas pump or whether that's a men's breakfast with grits, noticing other people is where true relationship begins. And that's the only foothold we have to truly lead them and disciple them toward Christ.
Yeah, I hope we can notice people, Martha and Mary. People look at that and go, well, he rebuked Martha. No, he observed Martha, and he offered her an opportunity for something better that somebody else was having. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Jeff, closing thought?
I'm just loving what Brother Dan just said.
Yeah,
it's like the art of noticing.
We can call it that.
Yeah. I love that. That's my takeaway. I'm going to take that with me, brother. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that taking advantage of that, making the most of those opportunities, that is truly practical discipleship.
Yeah, that's how it all starts, right?
And that's every day. That's the beauty of what can happen as discipleships. And I believe that what if we understood that who was it? Was it Michael Card who had the song, "The Joy is in the Journey"? There's a joy in the journey.
Sounds like a Michael Card title, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I can see my acoustic guitar. But the point is, we become so destination driven, so agenda driven.
Yeah.
We can even become so, and this is what we have to watch out for, we can even become so mission driven that we miss that the people along the way are the mission.
Yeah.
Jesus and the disciples are going, hey, Jesus, we got to get to Jerusalem. He's over here at a well talking to some chick, and it's like, I know I can't say chick. He's talking to some woman at the well that he wasn't supposed to be talking to.
That's right.
They see that as a disruption to the mission, and he sees it as the mission.
The mission.
He sees it as the mission. The ruler who came to him, over and over and over, you see that the mission became revealed. The mission was accomplished through the connectivity of the 1,000 points that he experienced along the journey. And that song, The Joy is in the Journey, was one of those profound revelations where I realized I'm so focused on getting there. It's like going on vacation. I'm like, okay, we're going to Florida. Nobody potties, nobody eats. Go to sleep, you'll wake up there. And 8 hours later, we're kind of there. Everybody's miserable. Their bladders have burst along the way on 95. Kids are starving to death. Organs are shutting down. Mass chaos. Cats, dogs living together. Anyway, I'm rambling. Listen, thank you so much for being a part of this. Dan, thank you so much for being here. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. Guys, we look forward to seeing you next time. Like, subscribe, share this if it's valuable or you think you can bring value to someone else's life. And we look forward to seeing you next week. All right. God bless you.